George Russell, Mercedes contract demands still no resolution or agreement with Mercedes with just 7 races left of the season. Is George playing hardball? This is F1 Grandstand. I'm Tony Craig. And if you are an F1 fan, then you are in the right place. Hit the subscribe button and the bell button now. Join the community and get involved. Let's get into it. So, what has been going on? Well, George Russell's Mercedes contract still hasn't been announced or agreed. Russell and Toto Wolff have consistently played down the urgency of the situation all season. Now, Toto Wolff has indicated that Russell's extension is a matter of time. Very few, though, expected it still to be a talking point with just 7 races left of the 2025 season. It's clear that there are still some disagreements that need to be resolved before Mercedes can tie down George Russell, and we will get into those, and we'll also discuss teammate Kimi Antonelli later as to whether he'll be staying for the 2026 season as well. Okay, first of all, Toto Wolff publicly has been courting Max Verstappen this season and not making George's contract a priority. That has not helped. Now, Toto and Max together plotting on his yacht twice this season and really leaving his current number 1 driver thinking, what the hell? How valuable am I to this team? Especially when he has been doing a sterling job all season, arguably driver of the season. Maybe Max pips him to that right now, but he's definitely the top 2. So, former Mercedes driver Nico Rosberg has waded in with his thoughts, speaking on Sky Sports F1 show podcast. Now, Nico Rosberg reiterated that Wolff is a horrible negotiating partner. He tactically disappears when he receives a counteroffer. Rosberg, who drove for Mercedes between 2010 and 2016, suspects that Russell has got 2 main gripes. The first is likely related to salary. It's previously been reported that Mercedes don't want to match Lando Norris's salary, even though Russell is of similar stature. And you might argue, actually, that George Russell is the better driver. He's definitely allowed that Mercedes to look better than it actually is. Hey, Eric. Hey, Gemma. Nice to see you in the chat. So there's also been suggestions that Russell wants reduced sponsorship commitments under his new deal. Now, Rosberg says that these can take up to 60 days a year for some drivers. Now, obviously, no drivers want to be hanging out with the sponsors, but it's part of the contract. Now, Rosberg goes on to say, it's horrible to negotiate with Toto. He said, he just disappears off planet Earth when you're trying to get better terms. I suffered a lot. Now, it's George doing the reverse to Toto. He's fighting Toto with his own medicine. George is apparently not happy with a couple of terms in his contract and he's in no rush to resolve it. So Rosberg is saying that now George is not rushing to sign anything. He's making Toto wait. However, George is a Mercedes junior, so he won't be on a Lando Norris level salary by far. George feels that Lando is equal to him. George can drive at Lando's level and can win races and championships if he has the car. Now, I believe that's true. George Russell can definitely win a world championship in the right car. And of course, he will feel that that's not quite fair that he's so far away from Lando's salary. So what is Lando's salary? Well, Lando's on about 25 million a year and George is on about 15 million a year. But here's the other thing. Lando's contract is to the end of 2028, where George's contract is, the contract term is, we're going to come to that, but the contract term is, the length is very, very important point. Yeah, you're right, Eric. Toto goes on vacation with Max too much. Damn right he does. Now, there's also things like sponsor days. Nowadays, these teams have so many sponsors paying so much money, and the only way for a team to give back to a sponsor is, of course, logo space and driver time. They want their customers to be able to meet George Russell, see him on those track days, do the promo that's needed. So they're using the drivers an awful lot in order to keep that money coming in. Now, we're talking about 60 days a year. But the pendulum has swung George's way, because now Verstappen is off the market. Mercedes don't really have any alternatives to Russell for next year. Now, most of the desirable drivers are under contract elsewhere. Even drivers with exit clauses appear likely to bide their time and assess the 2026 pecking order, because obviously 2026 we've got all these rule changes and we don't know which teams are going to be competitive. We've got people designing brand new platforms for cars, new engines. Honestly, we're going to see teams like Aston Martin be at the top, I think, because it's an Adrian Newey designed car. But we could see, even teams like Alpine having a resurgence, Williams being competitive. We just don't know. And for instance, former Mercedes target Carlos Sainz has recommitted to Williams. So Rosberg says that Russell could threaten not to sign at all as the ultimate trump card in negotiations. But should he do it? There's no indication that situation has become that severe just yet, though. George will be working on the bonuses, not on his base salary, but he's basically going to be saying to Toto, come on, if we're winning together and I'm on such a low salary comparatively to Lando Norris, at least give me higher bonuses. I think those would be the points where George is hanging it out. George has a lot of power, obviously, and he can take it all the way to, well, then I'll just stay at home for a year. And that's what Rosberg has got to say on it all. But he's not mentioned the elephant in the room, because Rosberg is really missing one very important point, though. George wants a minimum of a 2-year deal. And Toto has publicly said, if a driver says I'd be quicker if I had a 2-year contract, that's not right. Yes, Toto, but that's a very convenient comment for a team owner to say, because you want to retain flexibility to change drivers when you want to change drivers. So of course that's a comment you'd say. And of course it's a comment you'd say if you want Max Verstappen in your car in 2027. And contract length is often about rewarding your good drivers so they feel valued. Now, on that, if you signed Max Verstappen, do you think he'd sign a 1-year deal? No. Do you think he'd even sign a 2-year deal? Possibly not. You might be looking at a 3-year deal for him. So you can't say if a driver wants more than 1 year, then it's not right, because we've also got to look at George's performances over this year. He's made the Mercedes look better than it actually is. He has definitely added value to that car. No doubt about it. And he's even provided you with a race win in Canada with a car that, let's be honest, is a bag of spanners. It only handles well in cool, dry conditions. Not if it's too hot, it doesn't work. If it's too cold, it doesn't work. If it's too wet, it doesn't work. So it's the Goldilocks of F1 cars. So Toto also goes on to say that we're not negotiating at the moment with George. He will be driving for Mercedes next year. But George is not so definite, because until it's signed, Toto, it's not agreed. So I'm going to go to the chat. Let's see what you guys are saying. So yeah. Hey, Yvonne, nice to see you in there. Yeah, so Eric says Mercedes platform has been subpar this generation. Yes, it has. And like Red Bull with Max, George makes the best of it. They should appreciate him. Exactly, Eric. How do you appreciate your number one driver? Well, you don't publicly court the only driver in the field that's better than him, Max Verstappen, get him on your yacht twice in the year and try and even get him in the car for next year, whilst your number one driver, who is probably the number two driver on the entire grid, is doing a sterling job for you and leaving him hanging about his contract for next year. And then try and strong arm him and say, if a driver asks for a 2-year deal, that's not right. Because that is total bollocks. There's no way, if you do sign Max Verstappen he is going to sign a 1-year deal. No way. Not in this universe. And you wouldn't want him to sign a 1-year deal because you know he's the best driver in F1. So you would want to nail him down for a 3-year deal. So none of it makes sense. And all you're saying to George is, you're not my first choice. Max is. So if I'm George, yeah, I'm going to hold out. And yeah, if that means taking time out and having a year off, why not? And maybe George should be looking at signing a pre-deal with Aston Martin for 2027 because he's a great driver. And George could play hardball. Hey, Seren, babe, nice to see you. Nice to see you in the chat. Is the famous Tony? Not that famous. Famous in my own living room. Yeah, Eric, you're absolutely right. George is a top tier driver. Top tier. And he is a sponsors and corporate. He's a corporate dream, isn't he? You know, he should be very desirable, but Toto wants someone else. And that's what you get with George. With George Russell, I imagine him. He reminds me of he's the James Bond of F1. He's the head of the Drivers Association. He's calm, cool, collected. He's funny in a dry sense of humour way. He is a sponsor's dream. But above all of that, he's a racer. He's quick. He is super quick and he's got such a smooth driving style. And in those new cars in 2026, because of the way they're designed and because they're going to have regenerative braking to a whole new level, which is almost going to feel like automatic braking, the smoother drivers that know how to manage the car tyres and know how to manage battery life are going to be the ones that do well. And it plays perfectly in to George's driving style. And actually, I'm not 100% sure, even though Max is the best driver on the grid right now, he has an incredibly aggressive driving style. How is that going to work when 50% electrification, he's got to manage that battery power? You've got regenerative braking, which basically means you're going to be rolling the car into the corners rather than applying brakes. And Max is heavy on the brakes, late braking, very aggressive. The driving style to make those cars work is going to be different. You're going to see drivers like Hamilton with his smooth driving style do very, very well. And his experience. Fernando Alonso with his driving style do very, very well. George Russell do very, very well. You might find George Russell takes Max Verstappen to school in 2026. So when it comes down, good to see you in there. Hey, the Wooden, nice to see you in the chat. So I'm not going to go to the chat actually. The Wooden, these contracts are normally signed and sealed before the summer break. Something is definitely up. I suspect Max will be in a Mercedes next year. Ooh, controversial. I don't think it's possible though, the Wooden, because he had an exit clause in his contract only if he was lower than third position. If he had to be fourth position in the Drivers' Championship or lower to have an exit clause to get out of his contract for next year. Because that didn't happen, Max Verstappen must start next year in a Red Bull. So I don't think they can get Max for 2026, which means Mercedes are stuck. They need a good driver for 2026, and George is that good driver. But George is saying, hey, I know my value, I know my worth. Why would I just sign a 1-year deal while you wait for Max? I mean, George has got this decision to make, because if he holds out, I think we could see George in an Aston Martin in 2027. But who will he drive for in 2026? He's got the option to say, all right, I'll have a year off. I'll take a year out. I'll have a gap year. But that's risky, isn't it? A year out of Formula One is risky, even when you're as good as he is. So the other thing George is thinking, well, is that if he's in a Mercedes, he's got a chance of winning the championship next year. If the Mercedes power unit is as good as we think it's going to be, and they sort the aero out and they build him a good car, George could be world champion in that Mercedes next year. So he wants to be competitive, but what other competitive car on the grid doesn't have a driver? I mean, Alpine will have a seat. Who else? I mean, Alpine, we don't even know where they're going to be next year. And they are going to be running the Mercedes power unit. But how good is their aero? How good's their chassis going to be? How good is their suspension going to be? There's only one car who's not in the top team at the moment. And that's the Aston Martin, which I believe is going to be a major competitor. And I think the new car coming in 2026 is going to be freaking brilliant. But you can't get a seat there because Fernando Alonso's got a seat, Lance Stroll's got a seat, and they're nailed on. 2027, yeah, I can see him in that. I can definitely see him in an Aston Martin. But, so George is stuck. So I'm going to go to the chat. So we've got Eric, maybe Red Bull Ford power plant ends up being good. Who knows with the 50-50 hybrids. Eric, you see, I love that. Because it's positive thinking. Because we know, and if you don't know, you were living under a rock, but Red Bull are building their own engine with Ford next year. Their own power unit. Red Bull's never built a power unit before, so they're doing it in partnership with Ford. Now, the rumour mill tells us that power unit development is not that great at the moment. There's still work to be done. However, if they get their ducks in a row and they do deliver, first time out the gate, a power unit better than Mercedes and Ferrari. And remember, Mercedes are supplying 40% of the grid. They've got Mercedes, they've got Williams running the Mercedes power unit, they've got Alpine running the Mercedes power unit. Ferrari have got Haas running the Ferrari power unit. They've got Cadillac running the Ferrari power unit. And also McLaren, by the way, are running the Mercedes power unit. Red Bull are running their own power unit with Ford. Audi, Saudi are becoming Audi. If you didn't know, Audi are going to be running their own power unit. And Honda will be supplying the power unit for Aston Martin. So it's going to be a very interesting conversation about these power units because they're all completely different to what they're running right now. Current power units are 80% internal combustion engine, 20% electrification. We're going to a 50-50 split. 50% battery, 50% internal combustion engine. It's a whole new thing. They're changing as well how they recharge the battery. Right now, they use kinetic energy from exhaust gases, which is very, very complicated, very, very expensive. Lots can go wrong. They wanted to simplify the power unit. So now they're using regenerative braking to recharge those batteries, just like you see in a Tesla. Basically, it's Tesla technology, but on steroids. And that's basically what they're doing, okay? And that's what's going to be... but what that means is the way the car moves is going to be different because braking completely changes because the motor provides its own braking on the rear axle to regenerate power. So the cars have to be driven differently. So they're going to be rolling through corners and the motor is going to be doing that regenerative braking, doing a lot of the braking instead of the application of the pedal, which means less wear on the brake discs, less wear on the brakes in general, which means smaller brakes on the rear. And Brembo are having a nightmare of building those brakes. So we just don't know what these cars are going to be like in 2026. It's very exciting, but it does allow a lot of these teams to change. But what does this mean for contract negotiations for George? What does he do? We know he's rejected the first offer from Mercedes. And the sticking points are, if Nico Rosberg's right, is he wants more money. And actually, if that's probably his negotiating tool, right? He wants a 2-year deal. Toto Wolff doesn't want to give him a 2-year deal. So George has every right to say, all right, if you're not going to give me a 2-year deal, you want me on a 1-year deal, well then I want the same salary as Lando Norris. I want 25 mil, not 15 mil. So that's the first point. And the second point, if he has to agree to a crappy 1-year deal, well then yeah, why not reduce your press commitments with your sponsors? Because that is a freaking nightmare for drivers. No driver wants to do those. So those are his negotiating points. How it's going to play out, I don't know, because Toto Wolff does play hardball. And according to Nico Rosberg, he disappears when you try and negotiate with him. And I've not even got on to Kimi Antonelli yet, which we'll come to next after we've discussed this. So, yeah, so Eric's saying that Max might want to stay beyond 2026. And you're absolutely right. Max just wants to be in the fastest car. So if Toto Wolff is causing all this problems with the second best driver in Formula One, thinking that Max is going to come in 2027, and Eric's absolutely right. What if that Red Bull is good in 2026? And what if Max Verstappen wins a world championship in that Red Bull in 2026? Do you think he's going to honour some sort of verbal agreement with Toto saying, yeah, I'll come and be a driver for 2027? Is he? Heck, he's definitely not. And if that Mercedes is not good and a seat opens up at Aston Martin, do you think George Russell's going to say, okay, Toto, that's 1 year deal and you're offering me that 1 year extension? Well, you can go fuck yourself because I'm going to go to Aston Martin in an Adrian Newey car. And then then Toto's fucked, basically, excuse my French. So it's a real game. The driver market's quite exciting. Oh, so Gemma's in the chat saying, what is Tubby saying? So Tubby George is my man on the ground. And he was in Italy. Yeah, he was in Italy. And he said, I'm going to tell you what Tubby said. He said George said no. That's what he said. He told me that George rejected the contract that's on the table. He said no. He said no deal. That's why it's on the thumbnail. Because Tubby George said George Russell found some balls and said to Toto, no deal. 7 races left. And it's really who blinks? Who's going to move first, Toto or George? So George Russell said no deal. Toto publicly says if a driver asks for a 2-year deal because he'll be quicker, that's not right. It's who's going to move first. They've both got leverage. They have both got leverage when you really get into it. So yeah, so Tubby George said that's the reason. They're playing it down because they don't want this contract negotiation out in the public arena. But people in the know that George said no and that Toto has basically disappeared in response because George said no deal, but he did offer a counter deal. And the counter deal was more money than that was on the table and a minimum of 2 years. Okay. I'm not sure about what Nico Rosberg said about the sponsorship commitments, whether that is part of what George asked for in his represented terms to Toto. All we know is that Toto is basically disappeared and he hasn't come back with another counter. I think he's come back with this public comments where he said a driver asking for 2 years saying he'll be quicker is not right. And that is bringing the contract negotiations into the public arena. So yeah, that's what Tubby George had to say in it, Gemma. That's what my man on the ground said. The Wooden said, I don't think George has even been offered a contract. I can tell you on good authority, he has been offered a contract. But it was basically a 1 year, it was the same contract. He basically got offered the same terms he's on now for another year. So it was 15. I thought it was $30 million because that's what came out, but it's not. It was 15 plus bonuses and a 1 year deal. And George has gone, no deal to that. And that's the contract that was on the table. And I don't blame him because he also had to watch his boss, Toto, take Max Verstappen out on his boat twice this year. And he knows exactly what's going on. They're discussing Max Verstappen's move to Mercedes. But Toto has to be careful because like Eric said in the chat, what if the Red Bull is quick? If it's quick, Max Verstappen, doesn't matter the conversations had on Toto's boat this year, he'll stay with Red Bull. All Max cares about is being in the fastest car. So Max is basically hedging his bets, going, all right, Toto, I could be with you in 2027. He gets to see how good that car is next year. If that car is a bag of spanners, trust me, Max Verstappen will not be driving for Mercedes. No matter how big the contract offer is, no matter how many years he's offered, if that car is not good, no matter what his relationship is with Toto, if the 2026 Mercedes is not good, Max will not be going to Mercedes in 2027. He'll be doing the same thing with other competitive manufacturers. That's what will happen. Simple as that. So Toto's playing a very difficult game. And Yvonne says, Max won't win next year because of the engine. And I kind of agree, Yvonne. I would be incredibly surprised if the Red Bull is competitive next year, because let's look at it. They've lost Horner. Whether you agree with it or not, you can't take away from the fact that he knows how to win. He won, I think it was, how many races? He was on the podium for, I think, like 30% of his races. You know, what he did at Red Bull was unbelievable, turning a brand new team into a championship dominating team. Unbelievable what he did. But he had Adrian Newey. And Christian Horner has said the most important signing he ever made at Red Bull was Adrian Newey. Not Max Verstappen, not Sebastian Vettel, Adrian Newey. And I couldn't agree more. The most decorated man in Formula One. 13 Constructors' Championships in his career. 12 Drivers' Championships in his career. The most decorated man in Formula One. The most valuable man in Formula One. That's why Lawrence Stroll brought him to Aston Martin and made him an owner. It was the best move in Formula One at the perfect time, giving him time to design a brand new car when there's major regulations changes and a brand new platform. It was a genius move from Lawrence Stroll. And the reason why he did it is because he wants his son to be world champion. And that's it. And he knows he needs the best guy on the planet to build him a car that can do that, because his son is not the best driver. Adrian Newey builds a car that's better than the rest of the grid. You don't need to have the best driver in it to win. And he knows that. And that's why he did it. Simple as that. So going back to what Yvonne said about the engine, it's a massive question mark, isn't it? So Max Verstappen may have a bad car next year, may be awful. But Mercedes might have a bad car next year, may be awful. Aston Martin might have a car that's absolutely brilliant. Fernando Alonso probably wants to retire at the end of next year. Then Adrian Newey and Aston Martin have got hold all the cards. We've got a great car. We've got Adrian Newey. He's got a relationship with Max Verstappen. You've also got someone like George Russell. He can take his pick from the two greatest drivers in Formula One right now. Because if you argue Oscar Piastri might become one of those great drivers, I think he will be. But he's not leaving McLaren. He's tied into like 2029. Lando Norris, 2028. End of 2028. Oscar Piastri, end of 2029. These guys aren't going anywhere. So unless you get a superstar like, let's say, Gabriel Bortoleto suddenly hits peak form, and he could do, because he's showing signs actually. Bortoleto could be one of those drivers next year. If Audi get their ducks in a row, produce a good car and a good engine, you might see Bortoleto being one of those drivers who becomes top draw, just like we saw with Max in his early years. We don't know. He's a quick driver. So we might see other contenders. But right now, as it is today, Max Verstappen and George Russell are my top two drivers. I don't know about you. Tell me what you think in the chat. So Yvonne says Nico knows a lot, especially with his close relationship with most drivers. Yeah, Nico knows a lot as well, because he was with Toto Wolff for 6 years as one of his drivers. So of course, he's got inside knowledge about Toto Wolff actually negotiates. So we've got the Wadden says the same reason Newey said he went to Aston is that Stroll is the owner of the team, and to be held accountable like Toto at Mercedes, you don't have the corporate bullshit like at Red Bull now. Exactly. That's why Newey wanted to go to a team without all of that corporate bullshit from a drinks company and sponsorship. He's at a pure racing team. He's got Lawrence Stroll, who just wants to win. And when you look at him and you see him in interviews, Lawrence Stroll, he's got an energy about him, doesn't he? He wants to win. He is not there to make up the numbers, is he? And I don't think he gives a shit about sponsorship, to be honest. He's got more money than God. He wants his team to win, and he wants his son to be in a winning car. He's got that added motivation that his blood is driving the car, and he wants his son to be successful, because what does that do for the Stroll name? It's great. These guys who are billionaires, their name means everything. Their lineage means everything. Their sons mean everything. So all that added extra juice into that team, I think you're absolutely right, the Wooden. Absolutely right. 100%. And that's why Newey did exactly the right thing. Exactly the right thing. Going to Aston Martin. I'm going to go back to the chat. So yeah, the Wooden says Audi are the dark horse. They always produce in every category they've entered. You're right. You know, Audi are I'd say the dark horse is a very good description. And also, let's talk about the Audi drivers. You know, Nico Hülkenberg is a very quick driver and a very experienced driver and a very good driver to help them develop that car. And then you've got the young pretender in Gabriel Bortoleto, who is quick. There's no doubt about it. That kid can drive, and his rookie season, he is very, very, very impressive. And to win F3 and to win F2 in consecutive seasons, he's no slouch. So Audi have got, I think, a perfect pairing for 2026. And if they can produce, and I think they can produce, because don't forget, Audi have got all of the know-how. Audi own Lamborghini for a start, and Volkswagen and every other, a lot of other German manufacturers. All that knowledge in their stable. Of course, they've got a chance of producing a power unit that is freaking brilliant. So they've got an excellent driver pairing, and those drivers are nailed on. They're not going anywhere. They're not going anywhere. So you're right. Audi could be great, and yeah, Newey stayed at Red Bull for 2 decades, by the way. Yeah, well, I'm sure he got paid very well. And they had success, didn't they? Great drivers, great car. And I know Yvonne's asking about the new team. You talk about Cadillac. Well, Cadillac, their first season, look, they're running the Ferrari power unit. 2 great drivers in Bottas and Perez. But really, you've got to think of Cadillac as first season in F1. They're testing with an old Ferrari car with bolt-on bits. So if Cadillac are competitive in their first season, honestly, I will be amazed. Amazed. And if you look at Haas in their first season, awful. Second season, awful. And they were using parts from the Ferrari parts bin. The only thing that's interesting about Cadillac is that they're building from the platform. They're going to get a car out there for 2026, but Cadillac's intention is not to be sniffed at. Their intention is to have a completely American Cadillac car within 3 years. Their intention is to have a Cadillac power unit within 3 years. Cadillac suspension, Cadillac chassis, Cadillac running gear, Cadillac aero. They want to have a full Cadillac car within 3 years, and they'll do it. And they also want to have a Cadillac driver within 3 years, but they know there are stepping stones you need to climb before you get there. So to expect more than that from Cadillac in 2026, I think would be a shame. The Wooden says Red Bull used to have a frontman, Matsachich, but since he passed, look at the state of the team. Yeah, who are they left with? Helmut Marko. Jesus. Helmut Marko, the Dark Lord himself. That's what they're left with. But, you know, Laurent Mekies, he got his first Grand Prix win with Red Bull in Italy. Congratulations to him. Max Verstappen masterclass. So, reason why this show was basically, obviously, we were talking about George Russell's contract. So we don't really, I'm just going to bring it back, I'm going to rein it back in. So just to be clear, we've got this stalemate between George and Toto. And I'm not exactly sure what the contract's going to look like, but Toto's going to have to budge on something. If George concedes to a 1-year deal, Toto is going to have to increase his money. That, I think, is going to have to be the negotiation. If George says no and wants his 2-year deal, then maybe George will have to agree to less money, because that will mean if Max is available in 2027, maybe Toto thinks that the disposable driver would be Kimi Antonelli, which brings me nicely on to Kimi Antonelli. What is going on with Kimi Antonelli in all of this? So, as you know, Kimi Antonelli has not really had the greatest season in that Mercedes. He's constantly been 0.3 behind George Russell, or up to 0.6 behind. he's not really been performing as well as the other rookies, like Bortoleto, in my opinion, Hadjar. And the thing is with Kimi, he's going to do as he's told. He'll take whatever he's given. Toto is also his manager. But will he be in the Mercedes next year? I think even Toto doesn't know. That's my honest view. I think Kimi Antonelli has not done enough so far yet to guarantee a drive for 2026. I think he has 7 races left to win that seat. Because Toto described his recent Italian Grand Prix performance as underwhelming. So if your boss and your manager is saying your last performance is underwhelming, what does that tell you? He's basically saying, if you want to keep your seat, son, you've got to improve. Otherwise, I will be looking outside of this stable. I will be looking outside for that seat. And maybe you'd see Kimi Antonelli in the Alpine seat, that available second Alpine seat, which might suit him for a year or two, actually. Because was it too soon to put Kimi Antonelli in that Mercedes this season? Was it too soon? Should he have cut his teeth, learnt some more racecraft, learnt what it's like to be in F1? It's different to F2. That step up is big. Not everyone can do it. And even George Russell cut his teeth at the Williams before he got the Mercedes seat. And it did him the world of good because he impressed in that Williams car, didn't he? That's why everyone was so confident about him being the number 2 driver with Lewis at Mercedes. Kimi Antonelli has been thrown into that Mercedes to go, hey, you better perform. The pressure to keep that seat is real. And Toto Wolff knows, even as his manager, he can put him... Mercedes are supplying Alpine with their power units next year. He knows that he can loan Kimi Antonelli to Alpine on some sort of structured deal for 2026. So Kimi Antonelli's not nailed on. I think really the first negotiation that needs to be resolved is George Russell. And it's a game of chess that both parties, Toto and George, are not. George is not rushing. He's holding his. Who's gonna flinch first? That's the question. But Kimi Antonelli is just riding the wave. He's just got to improve. If we see Kimi Antonelli put in some good performances consistently for the next 3 races, he'll get his contract. But he's got 7 races to win his seat, and that's the deal with Kimi Antonelli. There's nothing more to it than that. He definitely is not nailed on for 2026. So the Wooden, let's see. Yep. So I'm going to catch up with the chat. Yeah, so Yvonne says none of the rookies have been totally great. I think Hadjar's been great this season. He's had a couple of off days, but on the whole, that performance in Hungary was fantastic. Qualifying 4th, holding 4th. And you got to remember with his performance in Hungary, he held 4th position, and it wasn't because of any safety cars, and he wasn't undercutting, there was no pit work. His driving is what held that 4th position. It wasn't because of pit strategy. And his 4th place qualifying position was down to him. It was down to him. Hadjar has been very, very impressive for me. The Wooden says Leclerc at Sauber, Max at Toro Rosso, defo too soon for Antonelli. Yeah, you're right. Definitely too soon for Antonelli. You know, so maybe they'll rectify it. Maybe we'll see Antonelli in an Alpine next season. That would be great for Alpine, by the way. And congratulations to Pierre Gasly securing a longer deal to the end of 2028. Totally deserved. He has been under the radar, stellar performances in that crappy Alpine car, scored all the points for Alpine this year, handled it like a champion, accepted that the car would have no more further developments. They basically said to him, look, you got 2 choices. We're going to develop the 2026 car and make it as best we can and do no more work on the 2025 car, but it means you're going to have a shitty next half of the season, or we put resources into this car. And, you know, they didn't have they just couldn't do it. That team's in trouble. Renault shares down by 25%. They've got rid of their engine program. Probably a good thing because they're going for a Mercedes power unit. It's going to be a big improvement. They can only need now. They just need to focus on suspension. Need to focus on chassis. Need to focus on integration of that power unit. So it's the right move. Full new design, and it gives them a chance to be competitive. And they're giving Pierre Gasly a chance to be a number one driver in a car that might do better. You got Flavio Briatore leading that team right now, even though he's actually a special advisor. And we've still got the possibility that Christian Horner might come back as a team owner of that team. Watch this space. We know he's leading a consortium. We know he's trying to get that deal done. 300 million for 20% of that team. I hope he gets it done. I really do, because I would love to see Horner back on the grid, because I miss him. I don't like him particularly, but I miss him in Formula One. I miss the drama he brings. I really do. So I'm hoping that deal does happen. But that's where we could see Kimi Antonelli next year. It's not been spoken about a lot in the press, but I do think that is a genuine possibility for Kimi Antonelli next season. So yeah, it's an exciting time over at Mercedes. This back and forth, this stalemate between Toto and George. All I can tell you is for sure is that George Russell did reject the first contract that was offered to him. He said no. Money wasn't enough, and it was a one-year deal. It was basically the same deal he's on now with bonuses, and he said no. That's from our man Tubby George, our man in the paddock, and that's where we're at. And he presented a counter offer, which Toto apparently, if you listen to Nico Rosberg, has not really responded to. So watch this space. It's an exciting time. Anything can happen. And I love the driver market, and we're going to get loads more of this next year. The driver market is going to be crazy going into 2027, and we're going to cover all of it. So that is the long and short of it. That is what's going on at Mercedes, and that's what our man on the ground has told us. Thank you very much, W. George. So what are you saying? So Yvonne says the problem is the car. That isn't good anymore. You're talking about the Mercedes. Yeah, you're right. The problem is the Mercedes isn't good. But that's why George Russell has earned his right to get a better contract, because George Russell has made that car look better than it actually is. And remember, the Mercedes has got no more upgrades coming either. That is the car. For the next 7 races, you got to make do with it. You've got a car that only works in cool, dry conditions. It's the Goldilocks car of F1. Doesn't work when it's too hot. Doesn't work when it's too wet. Doesn't work when it's too cold. Only works in cold, dry conditions. Hey, but you got to win in Canada in cold, dry conditions. And that's how it goes. So George Russell deserves a reward, right? I think we can all agree. And, you know, he deserves to feel valued. And the one thing that's happened throughout all of this farce is that with Toto courting Max, is that George doesn't feel valued. So you better do something in his contract to make him feel valued, even if you're only going to give him a 1-year deal. And that's the sticking point. George Russell deserves to feel valued. And Toto needs to let him know that he's valued. And just saying, hey, you've got to drive for another year, which is basically an extension on his current deal, that's not a reward, is it? That's not a reward. He's basically saying, you're a place filler. You're basically the guy, when you watch the Oscars and the stars go off to the toilet, and then what they do is they go and get these people, they call them seat fillers, that sit in their seat so they don't have empty seats in the auditorium. So on the TV show, you're not full of empty seats when the stars go off for a wee. That's basically what Toto Wolff is saying to George. Listen, fill this seat for a year until the star comes in, which is Max Verstappen. So that's not how you treat your number one driver, who is probably the number 2 driver on the entire grid, is it? But that's what he's doing. So Toto, you've got to make it right. And you've got to allow George to push back on that contract that you've offered him, which is basically an extension. So the Wooden says if Toto wasn't trying to get Max for next year, he would sign George up on a massive contract. George is easily a top 3 on the grid. Yeah, he is a top. Exactly. And you know what? Toto is just basically thinks that he's got leverage, because where would George go? What competitive team could George go to next year that's going to be as competitive as Mercedes? Now, we don't know who's going to be competitive in this new era of cars and this new platform. But if we're picking the most likely, Mercedes has got to be up there. There are going to be these wild cards. You know, you might see Williams, for instance. You know, you've got an engineer running that team now, right? You've got Vols running that team, who's an engineer. You don't know whether they bring an incredible package because they've got a good engine, haven't they? They've got the Mercedes engine, you know, and he's an engineer by trade. And it's nice to see these team principals with an engineering background. There's more of them coming in. You know, the old Ron Dennises and the Christian Horners, the sort of man managers and the Total Wolves. We're now getting almost like a 50-50 split of engineers and sort of people managers. And it's very interesting to see which teams will do well with that. So that's what you've got with Williams. They could be a dark horse, which is why probably Carlos Sainz has already committed his future to Williams. He's going to be seeing what's going on in that factory. So 2026 is going to be, until we see that first race in Melbourne, right? Like, I can't wait. I'm so excited for it. But that's the real thing, the Wooden. Yeah, you're right. Thanks for getting the chat. George is easily a top 3 driver. For me, he's top 2. He's if Max is the greatest, he's the second greatest, in my opinion. So you're treating the second best driver on the grid like a seat filler at the Oscars. Toto, listen. I know you watched the show, Toto. Listen. You can't talk to them like that, Toto. That's my Toto impression. I know Gemma loves that one. But that's what I think. That is what I think. So yeah, it's a crazy, crazy thing. And I think the message that we need to send to Toto is really, Gemma, yeah, you love that one, did you, Gemma? You like the impression. But Toto, I'm talking to you, son. You need to give George some respect. You need to reward him for the good work that he's been doing. Are you listening, Toto? Are you listening? No, he's gone. But that's what it is, right? We need Toto to treat him with respect, reward your driver, give him something. If you're not going to give him a 2-year deal, give him some more money. And that's where they're at. And I don't know who's going to break first. Tubby George doesn't know who's going to break first. But the party line of Toto saying that it's just a formality, the deal's done, George is going to be in a Mercedes, is just a PR exercise. The deal is not done. There are still problems, and we just don't know what the deal is going to be. First deal on the table, George Russell said, no. So, how's Toto going to respond to the counter offer? I'm excited to see. But that's tonight's show. And as soon as we've got more news on it, don't you worry, we will be covering it. Thank you for everybody in the chat. I've loved it tonight. The Wooden, Yvonne, we've had Eric, we've had Gemma, we've had who else have we had? We've had Serena. Thank you so much to all of you in the chat. You made the show really good fun. Thank you for watching F1 Grandstand. Please like, comment, join the community, subscribe and hit the bell so you can keep up to date. It makes a huge difference to the success of the channel, and I am so grateful to every one of you. I will be streaming tomorrow at 8 o'clock with the latest F1 news, so keep an eye out for any breaking news before that, and I promise I'm going to see you then. Ta-ta.